Welcome to the Survivor's Guide to Thriving podcast, the show for people who are ready to break out of survival mode in order to build a truly thriving life. I'm Amanda Solman, and along with Mark Jewell, my co-host and the founder and CEO of Mark Jewell Speaking and Training, we break down common roadblocks that keep people stuck surviving and share ideas to help you thrive each and every day. This week, I'm joined by Marlene Eick. Marlene is an Ohio farm girl, creative agency owner, and a fellow speaker and coach. She's the host of the Live Your Story podcast, which will also be airing this episode, and a member of my personal mastermind group. Marlene is smart, funny, and passionate about helping people live their story, and I am so glad that she could join me here. Today, Marlene and I are talking about public speaking. Why people are so afraid of it, how to create a great speech no matter how long or short it is, and tips for taking the stage with confidence. If you listened to episode 49, where Mark and I shared ideas for creating more engaging workshops, I think you'll find this to be a really great expansion on a similar topic. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Marlene. All right, Marlene. So you and I talking about public speaking today. And I think the first thing that people think about when they come up with the topic or are thinking about prepping for public speaking is just how freaking scary it is, right? Like, I think we've all heard that anecdote that people are actually more scared of public speaking than they are of death, which, it's funny, I think, to us, because we, through our FFA experience and other leadership opportunities, you and I have been doing public speaking for a long time, whether in, really prepared settings or, more extemporaneous, off the cuff type things. So I'm just curious, like, what are your thoughts on why you think people are so scared to speak in public?
Yeah. So like you said, sometimes it's funny to think about those things now because we do those things so often, they're not nearly as scary. Okay. But I was thinking back to, because I didn't want to just answer for other people, what other people might feel now in their professional lives. I was thinking when I was 9, 10, 11, 12, and maybe being asked to do my first kinds of public speaking things, like what were the things that I was scared of? Granted, I was a kid, so it might be a little different, but I think the same concepts are pretty applicable across the board, no matter what age you are. And I remember just being so scared that I would not remember what I wanted to say. Like that I would have planned something, or maybe I had a line in a play, or I, had to memorize the FFA creed and say that in front of someone, or whatever the thing might be. Like I knew I had planned very well what I was supposed to say. I had a line in the Christmas program, like a Bible verse, like, or whatever it was, right? Like, here's what you're supposed to say. And then you're going to freeze and you're somehow going to not remember what you're supposed to say. And then from that, the real fear is that you're going to feel dumb. Yeah. And you're going to look stupid, and your friends are going to make fun of you, or going to feel weird, right? Or you're going to feel like everyone is staring at me, right? And I don't know what to say. So I think a lot of the fear comes from that, because even as adults, we have this fear of, oh my gosh, what if I don't remember what I'm going to say? But I do think that the maybe first fear as adults, it might be different from when you're a kid, is that as an adult, you're planning what you're going to say often. Like when you're a kid, the stuff is usually given to you, right? Like you have a line in a play, or you memorize this thing, or whatever it was. But as an adult, you're often the one who is given some kind of opportunity to speak in front of people. And so first you have to decide what you're going to say. And so I think that's a place of fear too, for a lot of people, is what should I say? Should I try to be funny? Should I try to be really serious? Should I try to be inspirational? And what should I say? And then the following thing of that, continually underlying fear of, but what if I forget it then? And what if I get up there and everyone's looking at me?
Mm-hmm. Well, and on that same note, like part of it is the fear of forgetting. I know for me personally, part of the fear in, to your point, like looking dumb,
Yeah.
is around like saying the wrong thing. So that
Yeah.
was always something. I have a history of like defaulting to prepared public speaking, or when I have, maybe in more of the professional setting, like writing things out, or having like a really serious script, or
Mm-hmm.
practicing a ton,
Mm-hmm.
because the idea of like off the cuff extemporaneous speaking
Mm-hmm.
where I don't have all that preparation, I am always really afraid that I'm going to say the wrong thing.
Oh, yeah.
One of my more recent public speaking experiences was in the Farm Bureau discussion meet. And that was one where like you can't prepare for everything that someone's going to say.
It's
And so
basically an
it was
entire contest
terrifying.
of extemporaneous.
It is. And so like I think there's two sides to that coin. One is forgetting what you're going to say when you're prepared. The other
Yeah.
is like in situations where you can't always prepare for everything, how do you kind of trust yourself to not say
Mhm.
the wrong thing or to say a dumb thing or whatever.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I'm almost digging up some of those fears myself, just talking about this, right? Of imagining that. And I think I'm in a place now where I still almost always get a little nervous before any time I speak in front of a group. But I get nervous for a lot of important things in just little ways. Like I play the piano a lot at different church events or other events. And even though I may be playing a piece that I've played hundreds of times and feel really comfortable with, I often still get just a little nervous before I start. So I think that's totally normal for anything like that. I usually just take it as a sign of, oh, this is something that's important to me. I care about it.
Mhm.
I want to do well. And so I don't think the goal should ever be that you will feel no kind of nerves or fear or anything before you speak, because that's just unrealistic. Like I
Yeah.
think it's just a matter of feeling much more comfortable with it. I mean, is that true for you? Do you just feel more comfortable now? You probably still have some fears, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think to some extent I'm much more comfortable than when I was, early in high school and just kind of
Yeah.
getting started in formal speaking. Um, but there's always that bit of nerves. Or I think too, for me as well, the bit of nerves around like, will I connect with the audience? Like it's one thing to stand up in front of a group and say words. It's another to feel as though you're actually like
Yeah.
making a connection, making an impact, that they
Right.
care, that they like what you're saying. Right. So there's some of that too, that the fear of like, how am I being perceived? And granted,
Yes.
we all have some of those insecurities or whatnot. But I don't know that
But
will ever go away
you
totally.
don't want to be perceived as just a robot who is,
Right.
spouting these words. So we've been talking about the term public speaking, though. That encompasses a lot of things. We're not just talking about getting on a stage and giving a speech at a workshop or a conference. How do you define public speaking? What do those different things look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think my definition of it today is much broader than when I
Yeah.
was younger and in, 4-H, FFA, some of these leadership organizations. Because in those leadership programs, right, there's a very formal definition of what public speaking is. Like
Right.
it's a
Right.
literal contest to write a speech, stand up there and give it, or
Yeah.
in extemp, to prepare something. And so I think today my definition is much more flexible. For anybody who listens to our podcast, we did an episode a few weeks back on tips for workshop facilitation and making workshops more engaging. And I think that's definitely a form of public speaking. Again, a little more casual. Like we don't have workshops that are just scripted from start
Right.
to finish, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
kind of adjust on the fly based on the people in the room. So that's a version. I mentioned the discussion meet, which is more of a conversation type contest. And so, or anybody who's done debate, like that's sort of a version of public speaking. But even in the professional world, like anytime where you have to give a presentation, or maybe you're at a meeting and you're doing an introduction for
Yes.
somebody, like a
Yep.
speaker or a topic or something, or a panel, like my involvement in Farm Bureau, a lot of times we're facilitating panels where we have to ask the panel questions and get clarification on things. So there's a lot of different ways
Mhm.
that public speaking shows up. Like, are there other things besides that you think of that fall into that umbrella?
Well, I suppose the other thing I was thinking of too is, let's say, you work for some company or organization that has sponsored something. And also oftentimes somebody from your company might be asked to give remarks at that sponsored event or workshop or whatever that might be. And so that's often a time where it's like, okay, like unless the communications department has written something for me to read, which again, is that going to be effective or not? Maybe it is if you prepare well. I mean, there's a lot of good things that could come from a scenario like that. But oftentimes, no one else has prepared content for you. It's just a matter of, you're going to show up at this thing. You're expected to talk for just a little bit and bring some kind of remarks on behalf of your organization. And it's like, what am I going to say that's going to be relevant? And or it might be showing up on behalf of your company to thank people for coming to something, or perhaps getting behind the microphone at an event where you're going to give out an award, and your job is to kind of introduce somebody but also thank them. I think there's a lot of just very small opportunities like that we may not think of as public speaking when we envision it, but that really is public speaking, right? Like, you're going to stand up in front of a room of people. That might be 12 people, it might be 500 people or more. And even if it's only 60 seconds, that's like a small chance for you to say something meaningful in the time that you have. And so I think there's a lot of small opportunities like that probably a lot of professionals get pretty frequently. If you work in sales or anything that's customer facing, you probably have a lot of those small opportunities pretty often.
Definitely. For sure. So that being said, a lot of
Mhm.
times people don't write things for you, right?
Right. No.
You're kind of on the fly with.
Yeah, you know that I'm a fan of The West Wing. Most people don't have a Sam keyboard writing things down
Don't
for
we
you.
wish we all, though?
Rob Lowe, could you come occupy the office next to me? That'd be great.
Well, that's what I have a friend who was a speechwriter for Tom Vilsack when he was
Oh, yeah,
the
cool.
Secretary of Ag. And I'm always just like, to my friend, like, can you just come work for me? Can you just,
Yes.
write wise words and
Yes.
wisdoms for
Please
me? I'd
learn.
appreciate that so much.
Please, like, learn all my personal stories and my own anecdotes and all the things I like, and then write things for me. Yeah.
Exactly. So for those of us who don't have one of those
You
people,
don't have a Sam Seaborn. What do you do?
exactly. Let's shift here into kind of the
Okay.
real tactical, tangible stuff. So,
Yeah.
As you and I were thinking about this, sort
Yeah.
of think of preparation for public speaking, whatever it is, whether it's, a long speech, you just some short informal remarks, whatever it is. I kind of think about it in two different parts. So one is like the actual content, right? So
Right.
the structure, how do you put it together? How do you write it? That sort of thing. And then the second bucket I think of is like the preparation side. Like, am I going to memorize this? Am I going to read this? Am I going to do some other sort of preparation? So those are kind of the two buckets that I think of.
And I
figure
totally agree.
Oh, go ahead.
I totally agree. Like, I think it's what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. It's the writing your content and then planning that delivery of it in some little way. And I mean, I think that might sound, if you're like, oh, but I'm not really a speaker and I'm only going to speak for 60 seconds, it might be like, it's not really this whole delivery that I need to practice, but you kind of do, or I should say, you're going to be much better off if you really put some thought into that. And I think that's what you're trying to say, right? It's like, no matter what the format is, if you think about your preparation in both those camps or both those buckets, that bucket of content development, what you're going to say, and then thinking about how you're going to deliver it, just how you're going to deliver the message, right? How are you going to say it? I think that goes a long way. What tips have you kind of come back to yourself over the years, and do you give people when it comes to like writing the content and figuring out what it is you're going to say?
Yeah. So I bet you and I have maybe a little different approach to this, which I think is totally cool.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to hear sort of how you structure things in particular. Depending on the format, like just my style, I do
Yeah.
like to start from somewhat of a written script just because for me, writing helps me think through what I want to say more so maybe than even an outline. But that's just how my brain works. And I like
Yeah.
to see how things flow. But that being said, the more experience I've got, also the more comfortable I am kind of stepping away from the actual scripted words themselves. Like when I was younger, or even when I was in college and I was on presentation teams for the National Agri-Marketing Association, like I would really get hung up on missing certain words or,
Mm-hmm.
oh my gosh, that's not what was on the paper. And now I'm stuck and I don't remember where I go from here. But today, because I coach some FFA marketing teams where I really try and go,
Yeah.
the information, right? It's not about the exact wording and whether, because the only one who knows whether you get the exact wording right is you. So let's focus more on understanding like the overall idea of what you want to say or the general
Yeah.
direction of where you're going.
I
So
don't,
that's definitely an evolution for me.
well, and I think that's pretty normal for a lot of people, right? So, and I know we're going to talk about the structure still of what those words should be.
Mhm.
But I think it's very normal that, especially if this is new to you and you haven't done a lot of speaking yet, writing, and even if you have, writing things out word for word can be so beneficial because otherwise our brains tend to go, oh yeah, I got that. I know what I'm going to say. But until we've had to put words to paper, we sometimes realize in those moments, wow, I haven't really thought through this completely enough. And then I would have gotten behind a microphone and I wouldn't have thought through these things well enough. And then I'm going to be like, people will actually be seeing my thinking coming
Mhm.
out of my mouth. Um, and that's not the place where you want to be figuring out what your thoughts on the matter really are or what you really want to say. You want to have thought through that ahead of time so that you can use the words that you'd like. Now, it may not be that you actually get up behind the microphone and end up using those exact words, but the
Right.
process of actually having to put all the words down on paper, or your phone or your iPad or whatever it is. I mean, I hardly write it down on paper. I'm usually typing it out, but
Mhm.
um, it just makes you get very clear on what those thoughts are for yourself. And I think if you get really comfortable with a lot of that, at some point you may not write all those things down word for word. I'm pretty sure that one of the pastors I've had in my church life started in a conversation I was having with him once about some stuff related to this in his sermons. He gave great sermons. And I think early on, he wrote everything out, like
Yeah.
word for word, right? And then we're going to talk about delivery as well. He probably memorized things pretty much word for word. But as his career went on, and he gave a sermon every Sunday and sometimes in the middle of the week, and just got way more comfortable with that process and his comfort level of doing that. I'm not even sure that he probably wrote those things out word for word as his career went on. And I think that's just a great example of someone who's doing it super frequently, and who might get comfortable with it and is so comfortable with the content because they're using it in so many different ways that they have thought through and articulated all those things and maybe don't need to write down every word. But that's likely not you yet. If you're listening, that's likely not you. And it is a good idea to write things out word for word because it forces you to articulate your thoughts, even if you only write them out that one time. I don't know. That's
Yeah, I
that's my
agree
that's my thought.
because I don't know about you, but I am very guilty of my mouth moving faster than my brain, where
Me
I
too.
start to speak words and then I'm like, wait, where was I going with this? Or how did I want to say that? And so
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
some of that preparation
yeah.
can help me sort of slow down that
Yes.
natural instinct to talk.
And I think just out of respect for the people that you're going to be speaking to, you just kind of owe them the courtesy of having spent a little time thinking through ahead of time what you're going to say, um, in terms of using their time well, in whatever manner that is. If you're giving 2 minutes behind a microphone to bring remarks on behalf of your company or say thank you, I mean, just do kind of give everyone the respect and courtesy of thinking through that ahead of time. So we're going to kind of outline our ideas, I think, here on what some of that structure should be. Just know that maybe this takes you a few minutes, or maybe it takes you a few hours, depending on what it is, but just spend a little time ahead of time I thank you for
Mhm.
that.
Agreed. I second that motion.
Yeah. So what kind of
So that,
structure, what kind of
yeah.
structure do you use?
I, you know what? I am actually going to pull my phone a friend card, and I want to hear your input first
Okay.
because I think you do a really good job at this that I actually can learn a lot from you.
Oh,
So I want you
thanks.
to go
Okay.
with your structure first.
Well, this is certainly not original to me. I mean, I think this is just a format that a lot of people who are speakers and teachers and everybody else uses. So don't feel like this is original patented idea, from this is just maybe a good solid
Copyright Marlene Eick.
yeah, teaching and speaking technique that I've, gleaned from lots of other great people I've gotten the chance to watch. If you can think about your speaking in kind of in three different steps. And so there's going to be 3 steps for every major point that you would want to make. So let's just go ahead and use an example here of that professional who is going to some kind of luncheon or event where their company has been involved in some way. And so they have somehow earned 2 minutes on the program to just bring remarks that are kind of a greeting or a thank you in some way, that they have a presence they can kind of have, and there's other colleagues and professionals there. In that kind of context, you're probably making 1 point. You have just a couple minutes. You're not trying to shove too much information or things into that, and so your point probably is something like either, thanks so much for coming, we're glad you're here. Or it could be, our company cares a lot about this community of folks who's here. Or it could be, this is why we're so invested in this project that's going on. Your point is going to be something pretty focused, pretty streamlined, and it's going to be pretty singular. And so you might be like, well, that's great. That point takes all of 10 seconds to say, like, what do I do with the rest of my 2 minutes? So here's how I think a really great structure is to set it up. Open up your time with some kind of story. The problem, it's not a problem, but think about the way the human brain works. When we just have information just thrown at us all the time, it's a lot to digest. And unless we have some kind of context in which to receive that new information, it's hard for that information to stick with us. So essentially what you're doing by opening up, before you even tell them what your main point is, before you get to that main point, you're opening up with some kind of story. And don't worry, we'll tell you about what kind of story you should tell and why it's relevant. But what you're doing with a story is you are kind of priming their emotions and their brain in order to receive your point, but you're also kind of building this environment or context or space in which they can receive the point and the point makes sense to them. And so, excuse me, let's say you work for a community bank and you're a community, you work for a community bank and you're at an event at which, so I'm kind of making this up as we go. We did not prep this ahead of time. So, right. You work for a community bank. You are representing that community bank at a community event. The community event that you're speaking at is one that the town you live in is there, you're building some kind of new community center. Okay. Like there's going to be a building project and the bank is involved somehow. Right. And so the point that you want to make is, my community bank is so invested in this community. We really care about what happens with this community. We're really proud to be involved. Like that's the point you want to bring. You might open up your remarks then with a story about how your community bank started with one gentleman who wanted to help an area group of farmers, and they banded together in a collaborative kind of way, created a bank that has served your community now for years. And so it's not about giving the history. It's not about saying our bank started in 1924. Yeah, right. A lot of times people don't care about that information. And, in this way you might be so maybe this wasn't a good example of a story, but so you would tell a story that really espouses and leads into this point you want to make, right? So you tell the story about how people came together to form a bank, or about how the community rallied around that, right? And then you would lead into something with perhaps a segue that sounds something like this. And that's why, And that's why Alpha Community Bank really cares about this community. And we're so invested in this project. And so you see what happens right there is that you get to the point, and when you get to the point of what you're doing, everyone's nodding their head going, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, I totally get it. Because if you just hit them with that cold, it'd be really hard for them to receive that because their brains and hearts aren't ready to receive that. But if you just tell a quick story that helps set the mood for that, gets their emotions and brain ready, then when the time you get to that point and you say, and that's why Alpha Community Bank really cares about this community, they're going, oh yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. Like it totally makes sense. Your point totally makes sense to them by the time you get to the point. And so you would do the point. So it's story, then your point, and then the third step would be, what does that mean? Like the application of that point, and what does that mean? And so in terms of the time that it takes, let's say you have 2 minutes of remarks. You might spend the first 15 seconds saying hello and thanks for having me. You might spend an entire 60 seconds telling your story, right? So now you're at a minute 15. You're going to deliver your point in 15 seconds, and you're going to tell them what it means and wrap up and say thanks in another 30 seconds. And people might be like, what? That means I'm only spending like 30 to 45 seconds on my point and what it means. Yeah. Yeah. The story is always going to take the most time. And it should, because you need to get people's brains and hearts ready for the point. Otherwise, it won't have mattered if you spent 90 seconds on your point. It's going to bounce right off of people. So you tell the story. That's why Alpha Community Bank really cares about this community. And therefore, we're going to be investing an additional $1 million in this project and working with these partners to see. So that's the, like, what does that mean then for us all? And we're so glad this project is going forward. And thanks so much again for having me today. And we're glad to be part of this community. Have a great morning. Done, right? And we'll talk about some delivery tips in a second, but I really like that 3-step method: story, point, application. And the story always takes the longest time. And really, if I think about the way I deliver workshops, so that's how it might look in a 2-minute remark, but it's the same structure no matter what you do. If you're going to give a 45-minute keynote, you probably have 3 points, but so basically it's story 1, point 1, application 1, story 2, point 2, application 2, story 3, point 3, application 3. And that's the whole keynote. When you're doing a workshop, it's the same kind of thing. And sometimes the story takes the form of an interactive type story or more like a hands-on activity, depending on what the format is. But for most things that our listeners are going to do, they're going to be maybe delivering remarks, talking for a shorter period of time in something that's wrapped into their full-time job. They're probably only doing 1 point for what they're going to do for the time that they're given. And that's how I would structure it. So that's kind of a long explanation.
No, I love that structure.
But I love it. Yeah.
I think it's something that most people can kind of keep in their brains, and it's a good way to layer on content over top of. One of the tips that I think kind of fits with that structure that I've heard is, especially when it comes to the story. I think I'm one of those people that I don't necessarily describe myself as a storyteller. I know people who are just excellent storytellers, and they're just, really good. Mark, who I work with, I think he's really good at using stories to demonstrate his points and really connect with an audience. But one of the tips that I've heard is, when you're structuring that story, don't feel as though you have to emulate anyone else, right?
Oh, that's such a great tip.
I think some speakers are really good at using humor to tell stories. I think some speakers are really good at telling like really dramatic, emotional, heartstring pulling stories. And some people are just good at sharing their experience. Like, this is what I went through, and this is what I learned. And so, and there's a whole host of other ways you could get at that, but don't feel as though you have to be someone else. Like, if I think just in the last couple of months, I've seen Amber Lee Snyder speak. I've seen a gentleman by the name of Matt Rush out of New Mexico speak. In the last year, I've seen
totally different speakers.
These are all very different speakers. I've seen my boss, Mark, speak numerous times. And so like, these are all totally different speakers, and that's totally fine, right?
But all good,
Absolutely.
good, and in different ways. I think that's such a great tip, because as you think about, okay, well, how would I tell a story about this point? First, I mean, think about your own personal experience. It's totally fine to use something that's in your own personal experience, even when you're representing a company. Um, but no matter what it is, it has to be you. So if you are a more extroverted person who is known for telling jokes and being funny and, all those kind of things, and that's your personality, then I would expect that this kind of story you might wish to tell reflects that. And if you're more serious and focused and your personality is just like way more even keeled, it would be weird if you tried to be really funny with your story. And then, because then you're also going to feel awkward and you're not going to feel yourself. And that will affect how well you can deliver those things, because you won't feel like yourself. So no matter what content you choose to write for yourself, to plan, it absolutely has to be yourself. And I want to just touch really quickly on the note of how you can use a personal story even when you're representing a company. So let's say that you work for a seed corn company. And so you are either a seed dealer or a territory rep, or, you're in some way representing a seed corn company at an event. You might think, oh, well, I have to tell a story that's super relevant to the company in some way, but not necessarily. So you might be, if we use that example of giving remarks at an event, you may open and again, like when I write these things out, I might actually be writing some of my first thoughts for a speaking engagement or remarks or anything on a piece of paper. Cause I like to, by the way, this is just like insight into how I work. Like I like to sit in a chair with a notepad and kind of brainstorm some of my thoughts, like with an actual pen and actual paper, like just because it helps me get my thoughts. Also, I think getting away from my computer screen minimizes the chance that I will check Facebook while I'm playing. So there's probably that as well. So I get my initial thoughts down like on an actual piece of paper, and then I may go like to my computer and type them out word for word. But when I sit down on my paper, at the top, I'm writing story. In the middle, I'm writing the word point. Towards the bottom, I'm writing application. But the first one of those that I fill in is the point. You have to determine what your point is going to be first. So I fill in fill in the blank, as you might say, on the middle one first. Then I decide what my story is going to be. So, let's say you're giving remarks in a professional setting on behalf of a seed corn company. And the point again is, my company is so glad to support farmers in this endeavor, and whatever the endeavor might be for whatever event you're at. You might open with a story about how you loved spending days with your grandfather as a kid, every planting and harvest season, and how meaningful that was to you. And you may tell a story about how every day after school in the fall, you would go do this, or in the spring. And, you may tell a short story about how that experience was so ingrained in you. And because of that, you learned how hard farmers work and really came to love agriculture. And then you segue right into your point. So you might kind of wrap up your story, and it's a very personal story. It has nothing to do with the company, right? It has everything to do with you and your personal experience. But then you segue to your point, which is, and that's why I'm so excited to work for this company who invests in farmers, understands the hard work that they put in. And it's why I'm really proud that this company is here, supporting the work that farmers are doing, again, whatever the focus of your point there is. And so the story there didn't have anything to do with the company specifically. It was a very personal story that you told, but had everything to do with the point. So don't think that your story has to totally be wrapped into something about the company specifically. The whole point of the story is to support your point and to prime people for your point. And there's just so many different ways that you can do that. And once you realize, oh, like I might need to have like things from my personal life that I use as I have opportunities to speak publicly, you'll start recognizing when stories happen in your life, right? Like now I do a lot of speaking. And so constantly I'm always just kind of aware of the things that are going on in my life. I'm like, oh, I'm going to jot that down. I literally have a note on my phone that I just use. And sometimes I just jot down like a phrase because I'm like, oh, I want to remember this thing that happened today. because I think it might be a really great illustration for this thing later. And so you might even start recognizing some of those things in your life. But I just wanted to add that in. Your story doesn't have to be something, it can be a very personal experience, and just personal to your life. And those are the best, because then it's totally about you and you'll put your own flavor on it. Because if you're a humorous person, it'll be funny. And if you're a more even keeled like person, it'll sound more like that. And because you pulled it from your personal life too.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Now, one thing that I sometimes see is people who try to include too many points in remarks, right? This is your Oscars getting played off the stage type situation.
Yes. Yeah.
People keep talking and talking and talking. And so part of that comes from a lack of preparation, right? And the fact that we're just standing up there sort of trying to wing it. Some of it might be personality. Maybe you're just a talker. But
I'm raising my hand right now. That's me. I'm a talker.
Do you have any thoughts or best practices or guidelines, whatever words you want to use, about, depending on how long of a time frame you have, how many points is kind of good to include?
Well, I'm just going to guess that for most things that our listeners are going to be preparing for, I'm just guessing that for most of the things you're going to be preparing for, you're going to have 1 point. Like, you're probably going to have 1 point. You're going to have one story that leads into that. So again, it might be those remarks that are a couple minutes. It could be that you have 3 to 4 minutes to thank a colleague or boss. Like that, there's another good scenario, right? Like maybe it's someone's retirement or someone's just done a really great job on a project or something, and you have a chance just in a few minutes to thank them. Well, open with a really great story that says something about them, right? And then move into the point that says really specifically why you have valued working with them so much, or why you valued their work on this project, and then what that means for you, your life, or the company. But you're probably telling one story. I think in order to use more than 1 point, you probably need to have a speaking opportunity that is at least, 7, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. And I think if you have less than that, you should probably not be trying to really shove in more than one main focus, because here's the risk. I mean, you can shove everything you want into those 7 or 8 minutes, but if you try to shove too much information into that, none of it is going to stick. And so you will have wasted your time. You'll have wasted your audience's time, because it won't have been valuable. They won't remember anything. And so you're so much better off building a case for, which is the point of using your story, right? Building a case for one really good focused point, hitting that home in a really great way, and then, exit left, right? and your time is up, rather than try to shove in more. I mean, do you have any rule of thumb that you use when you're helping people? I mean, I usually think in 5 to 8 minute increments, like that, if it's just straight speaking and not a workshop format.
Right.
At least. Yeah.
I'm with you there. Just because to me, good stories also need time to breathe. And so,
what a great way to describe it.
If you get too much in there, like, you can lose the value of the story,
right?
And the connection. And I think so often what people remember are the stories. Yes, we hope they take away the point, but like, if your story does a really good job of illustrating then the story is the best part to have people remember.
Oh, okay. What a great reminder, because yes, they're going to remember the story. And if we've done a good job with our speaking opportunity, the story or the point is attached to the story. And so when they remember the story, they remember the point.
Exactly.
And that's a great reminder. And great stories do need time to breathe. And I know we're going to move into delivery here, but if you deliver it well, it's going to take more time than you think to deliver that. I think one of the fears is, oh my gosh, I have to fill 5 minutes. I'm going to need like 5 pages. No, like if you tell it well, you probably only need a page of written things, right? If you're going to tell that well, give things room to breathe and to pause and to not rush. And some of that. So maybe this is a good point to move into the delivery of some of that, if that's okay with you. So if you have planned what you're going to say, So you have a story point application for whatever opportunity you have. You have done due diligence in writing that out word for word. Like in an ideal world, I've written this out word for word, and here's exactly how I would say it, because you've done your audience the courtesy and respect of thinking through that ahead of time. Now you're getting to the point where you're preparing how you're going to actually deliver that. Do you memorize it? How do you go from here, I've written out what I'm going to say, to actually being ready to say it in front of people?
Mm-hmm. I would say not as much anymore. Definitely early on, there's a lot of memorizing happening, but that's a comfort level thing. And
Yeah.
so, like, I don't necessarily begrudge anybody who starts there, especially if you have not done a lot of public speaking. Like, I feel like the reason that I'm able to not do as much memorizing today is because I did a lot of memorizing early on. And I've
Mm-hmm.
learned kind of what I do and don't need to know.
Yes.
Now, if you're doing a lot of preparation, you can maybe speed up that curve, right? Or speed up that
Yeah.
timeline of learning how to go from memorizing to not memorizing. But like for me, that was part of the just experience over time of learning what I do and don't need to memorize. I today tend more to be what's the point, or what's the pieces of information that I want to include. So like are there
Mhm.
certain data points, are there certain quotes, are there certain statements, and like having a rough understanding of how that all fits together,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
may not sound the same every single time I say
Yeah.
it.
And,
That's okay.
and when I work with people now, I've worked with a few clients in the last couple of years on helping them become better speakers or preparing for a specific event or whatnot. I even tell them, we're going to write this out word for word, but then I do not want you to try to memorize it, because I think that especially as adults, when we try to memorize every word, then we start getting hung up on whether we use the word wonderful or fantastic. Well, I wrote wonderful, but I said fantastic. And oh my gosh, what if I say terrific? Like, doesn't matter. Like, they're all great. But we get hung up on some of those things like that. So I I've reached this point now where when I'm working with clients, I tell them, don't try to memorize it. Like, instead do this. Let's say you have one page that you have typed out, like, so you've planned this and it fits on one page. Print that page out, carry it around with you for the next week. And every time you are in the car on a commute, well, you shouldn't be reading paper while you're driving, but every time like you're doing just those kind of routine activities, or you're waiting in the doctor's office, or you're waiting on an appointment, or anything like that where you have a spare moment, just read over it over and over and over again. I suppose while you're driving, you could actually record yourself saying it. I mean, you could just use the voice memo app on your phone, record yourself reading through it, and then just listen to it. That would be the same thing. But the point is just over and over and over again, exposing your brain to those words. And so now you've just heard those words over and over again. And, how long does it take us to memorize our favorite song? Like,
Yeah.
hardly at all. Now, granted, there's rhythm and notes, and there's a lot of other reasons. I know that like you can memorize that song quickly, but part of it is just you hear it. You hear it so often, and you really quickly know what the next words are going to be. So I tell people, don't try to memorize it. Instead, just read it over and over and over again. And then rather than try to deliver it from that word for word, make a just detailed outline from it. So make a detailed outline, and now try to deliver it with just the detailed outline in front of you. Because the nice thing is that when you have that detailed outline, your brain is automatically going to reach for those words and phrases and things that it's been hearing over and over and over again. And those are the words it's going to reach for. And so you're going to find yourself saying the words that you planned, but without memorizing it and worrying and freaking out about whether or not the next word is wonderful or fantastic, or whatever those things might be. And then you can go from a detailed outline to just a simple outline. And then you can go from a simple outline to just a few bullet points. And I think that's where you and I probably then, with more practice, like you move through that kind of those steps way faster, right?
Yeah.
So like now when you start doing this a lot, you get from the point where you're either typing out every word and you get to your bullet points really fast. Or if they are stories and points and things that you've been using often, you wrote them out word for word once. And so now as I plan something, I only have to start with an outline because I did the due diligence of thinking through that word for word at some point in the not so distant past, and went through that process already. So that's where I think the preparation piece can get a little bit easier. Just don't try to memorize it, and then you'll find yourself in a much more natural place.
Well, and I think this emphasizes too how important it is that your stories are something that that you are
Yeah,
intimately to some extent like they resonate with you either because they're personal experiences or you just know those stories so well. Because number one, stories are just easier for us to remember, but then we don't get hung up on the words quite as often, I think, because we're just telling the story and the story doesn't have to sound a specific way. Whereas maybe
right.
when it's much more of like a dry, maybe it's stats or just kind of straightforward remarks where those might be harder to memorize just because they don't come as natural. They're not something that you
Right.
think about. And so
Exactly.
often too, sometimes the way we write is not the way we speak. And
Yes.
so I
Yeah.
think that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to practice through that, and read through it, listen to it, speak it out loud. Um, and that again, your reminder about the stories is just so important because when it's a story that we're really comfortable with, eventually we get to the point in our preparation where we just have a full few bullet points. And the first bullet point is, story about grandpa growing corn. And
Mhm.
that's all we need because we've talked through that story. We know the story well enough. And it doesn't matter if we say wonderful or fantastic. It doesn't matter if how we phrase this one sentence about what we did after school. It's fine. And again, we're not talking about what you might do to become a professional paid speaker because there's a whole other level of preparation there. We're just talking about the everyday things that you do, um, and the everyday opportunities that you have to speak in front of a group and how you make the most of them. And in those cases, if you follow a process like this, story point application, and you prepare yourself in a way that you're not attempting to memorize it, but you read over that, you get down to some outlines and bullet points, man, like you're gonna be in a really good place with some really great things to say, I think. You will
Absolutely.
probably surprise your colleagues. And then they'll start asking you to be the one that speaks on behalf of your company even more often.
Exactly. Exactly.
um,
So, Marlene, I think the biggest part of this, like understanding how to write it, understanding how to give it, and working
yeah.
through that and practicing that is huge. Because, I mean, obviously, this is all about things that you have to say. But part of it is just coming in with an attitude of
Yeah.
believing in yourself, trusting in yourself, being confident that, you know what, you're going to rock at this and you're going to do a great
Yes.
job. And it's going to be good.
Yes.
So, beyond just like the words that people are speaking, what are some other ways that you
Yeah.
think that those people who are here listening to us chat back and forth
Yeah.
can help build some of that confidence or just that aura of yes, I'm going to do great.
Yeah, I was thinking through this ahead of time because we were trying to brainstorm like what would our tips be in this kind of area. And the thing that I wrote down first, which I think is often just overlooked but can make a huge difference, or maybe it's just me, I don't know, but wear something you feel great in. Like choose your outfit that day to be something you feel great in because for me, when I have to stand in front of a group, the thing that makes the biggest difference and how confident I feel is the clothes and outfit that I'm wearing. Like that I just feel really good in them. They're comfortable. I feel professional. I feel appropriate for whatever the situation is. But we all have those outfits that we just feel really good in. Or it may be that if it's, a Chamber of Commerce type breakfast in your county that morning, and you would normally just wear a button up, but for some reason, if you wore a shirt and tie, or if you wore a button down with a blazer, like if you just stepped it up just a tiny notch from what you would normally do, maybe that totally changes your confidence level and you feel like a total rock star. Well, do that, right? So sometimes it's about wearing something you feel great in. Sometimes it's about wearing something that's a little bit different than normal that signifies to you in some way. Like, it's just sort of sends these, signals to all of your body that this is something different. I am a rock star. I am here to do good things. It's all about confidence and mindset in that moment. And so I have, take it from somebody who for paid public speaking engagements, I have like 4 outfits I wear all the time to all of them. And there's a reason. I love those outfits. I feel good in them. I like the way I look, but I also feel comfortable and I feel confident in them. And so I rotate those all the time. And so I think that's something, just, think about that and whatever that might be. It's easy enough to like come straight from the field day to the thing, or straight from setting up your booth at the event to the luncheon at the event, or whatever it might be. And then go, oh shoot, like this isn't what I would have chosen.
Well, and I think just like your storytelling style is unique to you, like it's okay that what you wear is unique to you.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, I mean, to some extent, yes, depending on the type of activity, right? Like don't wear probably a t-shirt and jeans to a black tie event, right? Like there's probably some guidelines
Right.
like that. But in places where you've got kind of some leeway into how you present yourself, like
Yeah.
use what feels comfortable to you and
Yes,
totally feel great in that. Like I think this,
absolutely.
just because you and I are obviously you and I are both women talking about this, some people might think, oh, that's more of, women think about what they wear. But I laugh because Mark, who I work with,
Yeah.
he will tell the story that early on when he was doing keynote speaking, like he wore a suit because that's what he felt like he had to wear to present himself on stage or whatnot. And as he's gone along, now pretty much every event he speaks at are in like dark jeans, a suit jacket, and a button down
Yeah.
or what. But like being in jeans is much more comfortable for him, and he's able to do it in a way that
Yes.
still is presentable. There's a speaker I like by the name of Mel Robbins. If anybody
Yeah.
looks, does the 5-second rule,
Yeah.
and
She's
no matter
great.
how, for the most part, no matter how dressed up or dressed down, she has this brand of sneakers that she likes to wear. So like she will be in a suit with sneakers sometimes, or maybe she's more casual with sneakers, but like those sneakers are the things that make her feel like herself on stage.
Yeah.
And so like whatever that is for you, find it and rock it.
Find it and yeah, make sure it's appropriate for the occasion, but in a way that's totally you. And so yeah, whatever that might be. And so sometimes, yeah, women, sometimes that's about just like wearing a favorite accessory that you love for the occasion for some reason. Sometimes it's about choosing, do I need to wear a suit or can I wear a blazer? Should I step it up a notch because it increases my confidence? Do I need a certain thing that just makes me feel very grounded? I mean, I think it means so many different things depending on who you are, but I like that reminder. Totally be yourself. I think that another great tip is to think through how you will be introduced and kind of take the stage, like come onto the stage. And then likewise, how will you leave the stage? Granted, the stage may be kind of the front of a group at a field day, and there is no physical stage. Like I get that. So we're just talking about the stage in whatever way that is present at your opportunity. But you don't want to like be introduced and feel super awkward about the way that you come to the front of the room in whatever format it is, and then like go, okay, well now I'm going to start, and then like somehow start into what you've planned because that feels really awkward for everyone, including you. And so how can you just think through in your mind, like, what's that going to feel like and sound like? And flat out asking. I always ask, no matter what the opportunity is, whether it's just like a totally small little thing or otherwise, hey, are you introducing me? Do you just need me to start? If I'm just starting, is at a certain time that we're going to do this? Just maybe asking whoever's in charge of the event really quickly, is someone going to introduce me, or do you just need me to get everyone's attention and give these remarks? Just understanding what that's going to look like is important. And if you are going to be introduced by somebody, do they have some information about you, whether that is you having provided them some kind of introduction, or that's just making sure they know what your name is, how to say it, and your title. Like just that they have the information that they need for whatever the occasion is, and that you know how you're going to do that. start your remarks. And then when you are done with your remarks, who do you either turn it back over to? Or do you just tell everyone, great, go ahead and get in line for lunch? Like, what's the next thing? Like when you're done and you kind of leave the microphone, whether there is an actual microphone or not, what happens next? And so those things just make things feel polished. They make you feel way more comfortable in the situation too. So that's often something that's overlooked, but can make a big difference in the way you feel about the event.
Yeah, because I think we've all been to events where the speaker starts walking off the stage and people are like, no, 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 come back. We're not ready.
Yeah.
It's like, what's going on here? Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really good tip to sort of ask that question up front so that you're not the person who just sort of wanders away and then has to wander back.
Yeah, exactly. Or someone's like, oh, you're done already. Like, yeah, just have talked through with whoever's in charge, like how that's going to happen. And again, that can be a 10-second conversation. It doesn't have to be overly formal conversation, but just so that you know what's happening.
For sure.
What other kind of tips do you have for just making the total experience feel good and comfortable?
Yeah, so I think one of the big tips that we jotted down ahead of time that I really want to highlight is this idea of thinking through whatever sort of technology you're going to
Yeah.
need. So if you are using a microphone, if you're using a podium, if you're going to have PowerPoint slides or whatnot, and also understanding what the needs of the people who are putting on the event need from you ahead of time, because sometimes they want that material ahead of time, sometimes they'll just take it right away. So really think through what's the technical side of this. And just I want to put a special point on mics. So
Oh my gosh, I was at an event the other night where the mics, and it wasn't the fault of the people who were putting on the event. I think they were working with the sound crew, but either there was not, I don't know if had there not been good planning or communication, I don't know, but the mic setup was not conducive, and it really made the event suffer. It really made the event suffer, which was unfortunate.
Well, and I've had experience too where, maybe we're running customer meetings on behalf of a company or company presentations
Yeah.
where we've got, customers or clients in the room where kind of depending on the size of the group, the speaker will go, oh, I don't need a mic, right? Or they'll do the,
Oh,
hey,
this is such a good
okay,
point.
I don't need a mic. If there is a mic available, always, always, always use the microphone. And I guess the reason
Yeah.
I really want to put a point in that is, a lot of the people who are listening to this work in agriculture. And the reality is we've got some more experienced folks in our audience. You guys work in industries where there's loud noises and everyone's hearing is not always super
Yeah.
great. Like I don't mean to be a downer, but like let's be real about the industry that we work in. And so if you want everyone to be able to experience the stories and the points that you are trying to get across, they have to hear them. And so
Yes.
please use the microphone.
So again, and like embarrassing story time. I think about this one keynote I gave a long time ago at kind of a high school type event. It was sort of like a high school banquet type event. I don't think it was an FFA banquet. I don't remember why I was at, but anyway, it was a smaller-ish group, right? So like 100 people or less. And I don't remember what the setup was. And I don't know if it was because I had a story, I didn't want to use a handheld. I don't know. But for whatever reason, I was like, hey, can everyone hear me in the back? Got affirmations from a couple people, proceeded to do the next like half an hour with no mic. Oh, it was just, oh, what a terrible decision, right? Because yes, maybe they could hear me in the back, but in a way that they fully experienced everything. No. And also, like, we all have been to events where could they hear me? Yeah, but you really want your voice to like fill the room in a way that also like discourages side conversations and, like those kind of things. And oh man, that was such a bad move. It was, anyway, I think back on that and I'm like, ugh, that was a bad decision that I obviously learned from and have not done ever since. Like, oh, I think, we started this part of our conversation with you just saying it's a lot about confidence and mindset and the attitude at which you go into that. And I think maybe that's the biggest point to just remember is that if you go into any of these kind of opportunities going, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to suck at this. Everyone's going to hate me. Okay, well, people aren't going to hate you. But, if you go in with the mindset that like, oh, this is going to feel awful, Well, it's probably going to feel awful for you, right? If that's the expectation you've set for yourself. But if you go into it with the mindset of, oh, I can totally do this. And remember, they asked you to speak for a reason. Like there's a reason that your company sent you, or that this organization asked you to bring remarks or to say thank you, or I mean, whatever it is, someone asked you for a reason rather than someone else. So there, you've already got people rooting for you who want you to do a nice job at whether this is a 60-second thing or a 10-minute thing. Just go in with the attitude of, oh, I've totally got this. I can do this. I've prepared. Like I now know like a small structure that I can use to help me write some content. Hopefully we gave you some tips on delivery, but it's about that attitude of, I've got this. I prepared something well, and I can do a great job of that, because that mindset can really change the energy that you bring to the situation. And we tend to fulfill our own expectations. So what would you add to that?
I think too, the other part of the mindset is understanding that every experience in public speaking is an opportunity for you to learn what does and doesn't work for you.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
Like in there, like, you know what you're doing, but the reality is like, if something ends up not going the way you want, then you just get to learn from that. And the next time you do it, you to adjust accordingly. Like, oh, maybe I should have spent a little more time on preparation, or, oh, maybe I should tweak this story a little bit so it's clearer, or, whatever. Very rarely is the one and done experience. And so just don't beat yourself up, take the lesson and apply it next time.
Yeah, and absolutely. And if you're someone who's young and listening, like take the opportunities now, even if you think, oh, I can't do that. Yes, you can. Take the opportunity to do that, because, the more practice you get at that early on, especially, can be great. And that could be everything from, volunteering to lead groups of kids around at a conference, because you have to give them instructions, and that just gets you comfortable in front of a group of people, even though you're not really speaking. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities that can just make you feel more comfortable with that. So when you do have the opportunities to speak, you've got more experience and have a chance to do that. And you're going to learn something from every time. I'm so glad that everyone joined in and listened to our podcast today. This was fun doing like a collaborative piece. Let's do it again.
Thank you for agreeing. Yeah, I was like, wait, we both have podcasts. Let's just like team up and see what we can do. So yes, let's definitely do it again. Thanks again to Marlene for joining us on today's episode. If you'd like to connect with her more, and I highly recommend you do, check out her show, the Live Your Story podcast, in Apple Podcasts or in your favorite podcast catcher. You can also find her on Instagram at Marlene Eick, that's Eick spelled E-I-C-K, or on her website, www.marleneeick.com. If you like what you heard, make sure to jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. We appreciate the feedback, and it helps other people find the show. As always, if you are looking for more resources to go from surviving to thriving, check out our website at www.markjeweltraining.com. That's Jewel with 2 L's. And you can find us under Mark Jewel Speaking and Training on all the major social media channels. Remember, survival is dead. It's your time to thrive today. See you next week.